Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you again to Grace Life Unleashed podcast with Pastor Dave and Nick. He's the friend, and we're going to have to put Nick's name back on there again. It keeps coming every week. Again, we're here basically to help people understand just life issues themselves. If you want to know more about our church, it's Berean Bible Church and or Grace Life Church. And our website is gracelifeunleashed.com. YouTube is Grace Life Unleashed by Dave Sigmund. Facebook is Grace Life Church and or Berean Bible Church, and we have a Rumble channel, Grace Life Unleashed. If you get on YouTube, which again, if you're on the website and you click on the videos, it will take you to YouTube. If you're on Facebook and you click the links, it'll take you to YouTube. But if you get on YouTube, please subscribe. And if you want to get notices when our stuff comes out, which is basically on Sundays and Wednesdays, click on the little alarm, and you'll get notified. Again, this is just my goofiness. I'm not looking for martyrs. I don't know if you're looking for martyrs. Nick, you looking for martyrs?
I'm looking for people that stand for truth.
There you go. We don't want to die on that hill, and we're trying to help people so that they can make it to the other side of the hill rather than dying on that hill. And there's a lot more in that than people probably realize. What we're trying to do, and this comes from something that happened in my life where somebody basically yelled at me and said, stop throwing Bible verses at me and just tell me what to do. And I guess our theme verses come from Galatians 6, and we've gone through these every week so far, and I just want to touch on them real quickly. There are times in people's lives where we have to bear one another's burdens. In other words, we got to come alongside them. We have to hold their hand, and we have to help them. People crash and burn. They need just emotional help, even financial help. And if we're in a position where we can help them, I think from a Christ-like standpoint, we should. But our goal is not to hang on to them forever. Our goal is to prop them up and to restore them and get them back on their own 2 feet, and then fulfill verse 5, which is every man shall bear his own burdens, or his own burden there. In other words, get them back on their own 2 feet. We're not looking for slaves. We're looking for people who can stand on their own 2 feet. So what we're doing here in this podcast more than anything else is we're probably bearing one another's burdens. We're helping people understand the times, understand reality, and then have this peace because they know what's going on. The unknown is what tends to scare people. Now, just as a quick overview, because this is why I wanted to start this more than anything else. The stock market right now, the S&P is sitting at the 200-day average, and it's right above it. And to go above it means we're basically back in a bull market, or we're moving up. The thing about it is we are still in a bear market. And for those of you who think the bottom is in, it isn't for a little while. But looking back at history, and again, this chart shows history. When the Fed pivots, and the Fed has not pivoted yet, it's still tightening. Now, the thinking is, and I'm going to show you why in a second, and Nick, you'll get a kick out of this because you haven't seen this yet.
I can't wait.
The Fed has redefined what inflation is, and so they can lower the inflation number and fix the numbers. Do you think the numbers are fixed on unemployment and consumer price index and inflation? Do you think those numbers are accurate? Manipulated?
Yeah.
Caressed? Whatever word you want to use.
Absolutely, because they all have an agenda.
Yeah. What people like to do, and this is this emotional thing, failure of missing out. People want to be in the stock market when, the bottom's done. They want to ride it up. But what history has shown us over the last, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times, is that after the Fed pivots, and again, the Fed is still tightening, after the Fed pivots, then the market drops. Sometimes a year later, 27%, 48%, 51%, 58%. And so when the Fed finally pivots, which it's possible they are going to do very shortly, or some people say they already did, when the Fed pivots or does not raise interest rates again or keeps them the same, then the low will come in eventually. So we're not there yet. But right now the stock market's going up. So as long as you can protect that ride up, you're fine. If you're going to ride it up and stay in the market, you will probably go down 50%. So it doesn't even bother getting in. This is what I'm talking about. Not only will global investors in the stock market be closely monitoring the U.S. Consumer Price Index, that's the CPI data for December, which is going to be come out in January. They will also be looking forward to the inflation numbers for January, which will reflect the new methodology for the very first time. They're changing the way they calculate inflation.
A new methodology.
Yeah. And if they go back and recalculate what even they did last month, they found out that there was no inflation from last month. But this is how they measure inflation. It's not from month to month, it's from year to year. They look at like last December from this December, or the December we were in versus the year before, and they're going to decide that things are good. And so the stock market's going to go crazy, and then 6 months, 12 months from now, we're going to set record lows. So just be aware that we haven't even begun to see the effect of the tightening in the housing market, and people are like, "Oh, the housing market's fine." We haven't even begun to see the housing market drop. Used car prices are starting to come down a little bit. Those went up during COVID, and they're too high too. And all these bubbles, some of them are, money-wise, some of them are housing. All these bubbles are kind of coming apart, and the real effect hasn't come yet. So be aware of that. What I want to talk about tonight a little bit, and then Nick's going to chime in some of the stuff that he likes talking about, and because things I don't even understand. Our goal as Christians is others. As much as we, talk about doctrine, the purpose of understanding doctrine is to apply it to others. Okay. In Galatians 6:7, Paul says, "Be not deceived, God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap." Now, this is not anything more than a promise of reality. They always say when a lot of people go out and they sow their wild oats, and they kind of hope for a crop failure because they don't want their wild oats to grow. Usually our worst enemy is us. And when we make poor life decisions, usually that comes back to bite us. And that's not coming from God. It's just called reality.
He gets the blame for a lot of things, doesn't he?
It's always God's fault. It's amazing what God gets blamed for.
It really is.
For he that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption, but he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting.
That would be the Holy Spirit. Yep.
Again, you're living in the Spirit or you're living in the flesh. The flesh is a very interesting animal. The flesh basically says if it looks good, tastes good, or feels good, that's what I want. The flesh is very selfish, and the flesh is usually what gets us into trouble. At the moment of salvation, your flesh did not go away. Now, your old man did, and because of that, you have the ability to have victory in the flesh, but you still have the flesh, and your flesh will continue to be there until the day you die or the rapture occurs. That's just life. But because we have the new man, we have the ability to have victory in the flesh.
What's the difference between the flesh and the old man and the new man?
Well, it comes back to who's controlling you or what's controlling you. When you were in Adam or the old man, you really basically were on autopilot and you had no ability to say no, let's say. You kind of like things just happen. But now that you're saved and you have the Holy Spirit, you have the ability to make decisions and to control the flesh. And I use the word control for a reason, because you're never going to be able to crucify the flesh, otherwise you'd be dead. There's nothing wrong with looks good, tastes good, feels good, unless that becomes your life ambition to where it gets in front of the Spirit. And so it's just more like common sense. Okay. Now Paul goes on and he says, "And let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not." So where Paul's going with this is, hey, you can either live in the flesh or selfishness. Now there's a big, I don't know if the word is explosion, but probably exposure of narcissistic people. And some of that is overblown, and some of that is real. And narcissism is self-love, where people are into themselves. You put something on Facebook and then you constantly watch and see how many likes you get or thumbs up you get. And people that are into themselves, selfish people. And there's a lot of selfish people in the world. And really, that's not the Christian life. The Christian life puts others first.
It's the absolute opposite of that.
Yep.
Let us not be weary in well-doing.
Yeah.
And that's going to happen to every believer. If you jump into the work of the ministry, it's going to happen.
Yep.
Because you're not going to really be able to see the fruits of your labor if you continue with the verse. For in due season we shall reap if we faint not. Eventually you're going to be able to see the fruit of that particular labor. And just in my own experience, in my own personal life, as a believer, from that moment until now, I've dealt with that on various levels. And obviously, Paul is encouraging you to keep going.
Well, I think the issue is due season, because sometimes we give up too quickly.
That's true, yeah.
This isn't working. I don't see any results, and we have a pity party. It takes time.
It does. That's where maturity and experience come into play.
I always say, if you're going to be in somebody's life, you have to be in their life, and that takes time. People have to know that you really care about them as a person before they're really ever going to listen to you on a spiritual level, because otherwise you're just basically shooting from afar, and that takes time.
That's a very good point.
It really takes time.
You say that, yeah, you say it often, but it needs to be heard. That's exactly right.
Most Christians that I talk to don't want to take the time. They have no problem telling someone about salvation.
Most? Yeah, probably so.
Well, I wanted to say all, but I didn't.
You can't say all. That wouldn't be true.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I don't, for you example, and for me, I mean, I'll take the time. I'm always.
You're a people person.
Well, it's not even about that, man. It's just I know what I believe and what I have. All the stuff that we were given up front at the moment of salvation, when you come into realization with that and you talk about this gratitude and thanksgiving that overflows, it comes out of you. And that's honestly the experience that I'm having. I want to tell, it don't matter where, and you know this, it doesn't matter where I'm at personally. I will, at any moment, at any time, will teach or start preaching something.
Yep.
It's not difficult to be able to start that conversation. For me, you're just asking simple questions.
Right.
But obviously there are some people, for you to be able to penetrate the brain enough, they have to know that you truly care about them. And obviously something like that takes time. And that's the reason that you get involved in somebody's life over the course of time.
Well, that's how I say going door to door doesn't serve any purpose, because people that say, I have a church, goodbye, and they slam the door in your face, they don't care. It's all right. So Paul's answer is, as we have therefore opportunity. Now that means don't be pushing doors open, in a sense. Opportunity will present itself over and over again. You don't have to force conversations. I find that it comes very easily when you get to talk to somebody. As you have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all men. Okay, now that would be good, bad, ugly, saved, unsaved, everybody you run into. But then Paul says especially. In other words, let's put the emphasis unto them who are of the household of, and the word you can't see in the bottom there is faith, that got cut off. In other words, Christians should get a little more of our attention than unsaved people, and Christians struggle just as much as the unsaved world does, and
they do.
Be aware of that. And sometimes they struggle more because they think that they aren't supposed to struggle, so they hide it, and so they put on this fake face, like, oh,
I guess the
really
flesh
good.
went away at the moment of salvation. Everything's going to be 100% perfect and hunky-dory, especially trying to navigate through this life. It's just unrealistic expectations to think that way. And so obviously what we're trying to do is just to kind of almost grab people by the hand and kind of move them along, keep going forward. Because they'll figure all this stuff out.
As a pastor, once in a while, my wife, even my kids, would worry about what would come out of my mouth in the pulpit, and we'd be talking about something either in the car or on the way to church or even during the weekend. And my wife would look at me and she goes, "Now, Dave, I really don't want to hear about this from the pulpit," which means this is a secret, which at times she was right. And other times it's like, no, people need to know that we're not perfect, but she grew up in a family where everything was perfect to the outside world and a mess in private. And that bothered me a lot, because if you're living a double life, I'd rather see somebody see me struggle.
Well, that's eventually going to catch up to you, and it's going to be exposed. Even you can carry that for years.
Yeah.
But I think eventually it's going to.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate.
And that creates anxiety within
the relationship.
Within the people, where there was such there was even like a suicide attempt and stuff like that.
Oh wow!
Because of these emotions stay trapped in you. You have nowhere to go. And so it's
I think a lot of that has to do with your generation too, though.
Are you saying that I'm older than you?
A little bit. Just a little bit. I think you got me by, 15 maybe? 13?
I'm 35. How old are you?
I'm 20.
No, I'm in my 60s.
Yeah, you got me by a generation.
In 1 Timothy 5, Paul's talking about taking care of widows. And the reason Paul talks about that is, he may remember during Bible times, a guy got married probably in his late 20s, early 30s, and the girl was probably in her teens. In fact, case an example is Joseph was probably in his 30s and Mary was probably a teenager, 15, 16 when Jesus was born. And the first time I told my daughter that, she went, ew. But that was normal. The guy had a career.
Yes, it was, yeah.
The guy had a job. He had money. And a lot of times these were arranged marriages too, which actually had a better success rate than the way we're doing it now. So the man would die a lot sooner because obviously he's 15 years older. In fact, at the end of the Gospels, even at the cross, Joseph is gone. We don't know when Joseph died, but all that's there is Mary. And so Paul's talking about widows, and there was an issue. I mean, they didn't have unemployment or Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid or all these things back then. And so the emphasis was who's going to take care of these older ladies. And so Paul was talking about the church being responsible for taking care of widows. And nowadays with all of our programs, it's not an issue. But back then he says, but if any widow have children or nephews, let them learn first to show pity at home and to, what's that word? Request their parents, for that is a good and acceptable before God. In other words, the responsibility is the kids, okay? It's the kids' job to take care of their parents when they get old.
Piety,
that's the word. And the thing about it is, I'm moving in with my kids when I get older, okay?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sounds like a plan.
Yeah. Now, Paul goes on to, now, she that is a widow indeed, and the reason that he says that is because there's a whole list of requirements that Paul had talked about. And desolate, trusteth in God, and continueth in supplications and prayer day and night. But she that liveth in pleasure is dead while she liveth. So Paul's looking for widows that got their heads screwed on straight and are interested in living the Christian life and not out running around all over. All these things give in charge that they may be blameless. Now, verse 8 is why we came here. But if any provide not for his own, in other words, kids, take care of your parents. For if any provide not for his own, especially of those of his own house, he hath denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. And so Paul's basically saying that's worse than an unbeliever. Take care of your parents, okay? Take care of your family. So family is first, and the thing of it is, well, what do I got to do for these people? Do I have to what do I have to supply for them? Well, Paul says in 1 Timothy 6, but godliness with contentment is great gain.
Great verse.
We brought nothing into this world, and it's certain that we can carry nothing out.
Another good one.
Duh. You can have all the money in the world, but when you're dead, you have no money. There's no U-Haul going to heaven. Okay. And then Paul, he puts everything in perspective here, which I think a lot of us need once in a while. Having food and raiment, let us therefore be content. Okay.
Therewith.
Or therewith content. If, in other words, all you need is food and clothing, and you should be happy. Well, no, I need my iPhone, and I need my Xbox, and I need my car. No, Paul says, as long as you have food, and as long as you have something to wear, you should be content. Now, content is a good word. That means you should be cool. Doesn't mean you can't have an iPhone, doesn't mean you can't have an Xbox, but if you're helping somebody, you don't have to give them all the necessities that they think they need. People need food and raiment, okay? They want more than that, get a job, I guess you could say. But if you see people struggling, the two things you need to worry about is either they have food and they have clothes. And granted, we can talk about shelter and things like that too, but you're not responsible for supplying somebody a car just because they think they need one. So as you work with people, food and clothing. Okay. There's a couple more verses, and then we're going to get on some other stuff. 1 Timothy 6:9.
Keep going.
Okay.
I like these.
But they that be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and
Why
perdition.
do you think that is?
I know some very rich people.
This is really important.
I actually know some millionaires. Millionaires as a whole become very selfish, very entitled, and very selfish in the sense that they want to hang on to their money. And they're very hard to get along with because they feel as though, number one, people are always trying to take their money. Mm-hmm. And people are always trying to use them. Mm-hmm. And so they have to be very cautious to the point where we become ridiculous.
Don't they make money their god too, basically?
Oh, yeah. And they are the worst businessmen I've worked with.
Yeah, and the pursuit of it. They like the pursuit of it too.
Paul says right here in verse 10, I guess this is the key verse or word here.
And we're not saying it's not good to make money.
No,
so
for the love of money.
This twisted.
is the root of all evil. Paul doesn't say money is the root of all evil.
That's right. The love
He
of
says
it.
the love of money. Now, what kind of things do you do if you are only in love with money? You get sneaky, right? You start getting conniving. You start, playing games, I guess you could say.
Well, you start to, that's, when you go to 10, you start to covet so many things.
Yep.
When a lot of it comes when it's plentiful. And so that's kind of, it ties in beautifully. And of course, it always happens like this every week, because I could take this in 1,000 different directions. But so when you think about the elite, right, those that make decisions at the top.
That would probably be the ones with money, yeah.
The very few, right?
Yep.
So, I don't know, 1/10 of 1% or 100th of 1%. It's the exact same thing. No different.
Yep.
Just on a completely another level. And I think most people, especially most Christians, I would imagine, true believers, they have absolutely no idea what it's like being a billionaire and the kind of life that you potentially could lead on a day-to-day basis. You talk about the flesh, what looks good, what tastes good, what feels good, what smells good. All of that is incorporated, and it completely takes over. There is no aspect of the spirit. You know what I'm saying at that point? What would be the point? Why do you need it? Right? Because, in essence, it's kind of like you're on top of the world to an extent. From an outside looking in, you think that, right? But those that have it, have you met very many happy, rich people?
No.
Content?
No.
Do they have peace?
No. They're always worried about their money being gone. And if you ask a millionaire how much is enough, they'll just tell you a little bit more. They're just never happy. It's.
And they scheme and try to figure out ways to be able to keep that, right?
Yep. I knew a Grace millionaire. Actually, I still know him. The guy had the ability to fund the entire church by himself, and he probably should have, but he didn't. And the reason he didn't, he said, well, if people think I'm going to always pay the bills, they're just going to get lazy, and so I'm not going to. And so he didn't. And the church struggled because he wouldn't step out in faith. And the thing about it is, when he dies and he's getting older, that money is going to go to, I think, 3 or 4 kids. And only 2 of them understand grace. The other 2 are I don't know if they're even saved. And so what did he gain? I'm convinced that if he would have spent the money wisely and pumped it into the church, some people are going to take advantage of that. But that church could have doubled and tripled in size very easily just because stuff would have been available. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I didn't know that. But, all he was concerned about was making sure that he had enough money for himself, which he had more than enough. But he wanted to not ever run out of money.
Well, obviously you realize that Lord loves a cheerful giver. And you would think that kind of where he got to spiritually in his life, that there would be so much joy and peace and contentment and faith that he wouldn't even have to think twice to do that, even if it was a fraction of what the guy was worth, to be able to put that into the work of the ministry and what it could have, the fruit that it could have created. It could have been amazing. And that's, again, that's another situation. It's really unfortunate. But you got to understand, he's still saved.
Oh, yeah.
He's still a member of the body of Christ, right? So Christ still...
Well, what I'm telling people at church now, if you talk to these organizations like the Berean Bible Society and stuff, they'll tell you that their day-to-day expenses are not paid by the offering that comes in from people. And you're thinking, well, how are they paid then?
That's interesting.
They're paid by estates.
Yeah.
When someone dies and they leave, 1/10 goes to,
absolutely,
Berean Bible Church. In fact, Berean Bible Church would not exist today if a lady, it's been, I think Denny told me it was 20 years ago already, she died and she gave part of her estate to the church, and the church is still using that money to pay its bills. In fact, to be honest with you, I don't think we've ever been in the black since I've been here. We've always been having to dip into that money. Now, the problem is once people know that money's there, they usually don't give as well because, the bills are getting paid anyways. That's what that money's for. People don't like giving to savings accounts. Yeah, people like giving to needs. And so, but it is what it is. And even in our church, there's enough money there that the bills can be paid without it. But
I don't,
as long as it's there, praise the Lord.
Pastor,
there.
I don't know if I would have gotten to where I've gotten without the Berean Bible Society. It's been such a help and an instrumental of importance with me when it comes to my spiritual walk and my understanding and my knowledge. And then the application of that, it's been amazing. So just imagine if that organization wasn't here, and especially for me, because I'm going back to '99 when I was 19 when I got saved. So we're looking at almost 23 years, and almost 24 actually. I can't imagine it not being there.
Well, Pastor,
so why can't they give that when they're here, as opposed to leave it behind?
What people tell me is that they don't know how long they're going to live, and they need that money to live on. That's why I say make it part of your estate.
Yeah, but I think when you get to that point, right, when you're retired and you're living off savings and investments and things of that nature, I think you know exactly what it takes on an annual basis to live. I mean, you can even increase that a little bit for inflation. And then apart from that, right, you can extend that out, 10, 15, 20 years, and then whatever you think would be left over above and beyond that, give it away.
Yeah, but people, their fear is of running out of money. So, well, put it in a state. At least, and then in the end, it goes where it needs to go.
Yeah, I struggle
And
with
if
that.
you're looking for rewards, I'll guarantee you that's something that goes on way after your death that I think you will be rewarded for is giving to the church as far as your estate goes.
Yes.
And so praise the Lord for that.
That's at the judgment seat of Christ.
Yep.
That's different than the great white throne
That's
judgment,
a
isn't
reward
it?
seat for Christians on their
For believers.
faithfulness. Yep. It has nothing to do with their salvation. It has to do with their faithfulness. So,
Yes, that also needs to be understood.
So,
The
well,
difference.
like you were saying earlier, God loves a cheerful giver, and I think as a whole, a lot of Christians are cheerful, but it's amazing. I mean, it takes money to run things, and that's just the reality of life. And a lot of people are giving to the church too through our P.O. box and stuff that we're on the internet now. But again, it is what it is. It takes money to run things.
It does.
So again, as Paul's talking in verse 10 again, the love of money is the root of all evil. He's not saying money is, it's the love of money. And like I said before, God has not promised us health and wealth and prosperity, but that doesn't mean we can't have health and wealth and prosperity. It just means that
It's not
guaranteed from God. And if we get our ducks in order and do things, I think we can have health and wealth and prosperity. Health sometimes is a little bit more difficult because it's genetic in that sense, but if we plan and things like that, I think we can get our house in order and we can make it through these hard times. And verse 11 says, "But thou, O man of God, flee these things and follow after righteousness, godliness, faith, love, patience, meekness." So again, what Paul's after is just Christian characteristics, okay? And what we're fleeing is we're fleeing all of the flesh, the flesh things, okay? The temptations and being rich and what, money is, people that just money, they're always working, they're always, doing things, they never have time for the Lord. And that's the problem. And so, what we're after is we're after righteousness, we're after godliness, we're after faith, we're after love, we're after patience, we're after meekness. And those are all good characteristics that we should be showing to others as we get involved in their lives. People should see Christ in us. And
let's put this into context, right? So Paul is writing Timothy here. So when he says, "But thou, O man of God," these are, would you call this a pastoral epistle?
Yeah.
So he's teaching Timothy how to be
right, because he starts out
a
in verse
leader
6.
of the church, the body of Christ.
That will be rich. So he's saying, all right, I'm going to tell you about these guys that are always concerned about, money. They're going to have their own set of problems. Yeah. That's not the way you want to steer people, Timothy, because remember, the love of money is the problem. So we're not after making every dollar and that everything, but it does take money to live. So we need to have jobs and we need to have money, but, people always tell me, if I was a millionaire, I'd be doing that and that and that and that. I don't know. If you won the lottery this week, would you be in church on Sunday?
He's asking me.
You tell me.
I would like to think that I would.
I would like to think so too.
I would hope so. Hey, can I read 12?
Sure.
This is a very good verse. Fight the good fight of faith. That's what we do every day. Here's the key. Lay hold on to eternal life, whereunto thou art also called, and hast professed a good profession before many witnesses. I was having a conversation with somebody that's really important to me yesterday, and what this person told me was absolutely amazing. And so what I encourage, you got to understand, he's a mentor, but what I encouraged him to do with what he told me is to tell other people. And I don't know any other profession in this universe that has a higher calling than somebody that teaches and preaches the Word of God, rightly divided. It's amazing. Very blessed.
Yeah. Okay. As I talk to a lot of people, and most of them are not involved in church. I always say I probably minister to more people outside the church than inside the church. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't like church because they feel as though it's full of hypocrites that judge. And okay, I hope that's not true for our church, but I think as a whole, Christians do tend to judge more than they should, and people can feel that. But having said that, what I'm seeing with people is that, again, this selfishness is coming through. And I've talked to probably 3 different couples in the last month about marriage issues. And I'm really convinced that, any marriage should work. And, here's the pot calling the kettle black. Any marriage should work if the 2 parties are mature and want to make it work. And the key is in what I said, and want to make it work. And one couple I was working with, they were going through hard times, and the wife said she wanted a divorce, and the husband wasn't quite sure why. And the thing of it is you talk to people, remember, there's always 2 sides of the story. If you're going to talk to one half of the marriage, you really got to talk to the other half, because a lot of times the stories don't quite match, and a lot of times neither side really knows the truth, and the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. And that's just human nature more than anything else. But even with my sister, when she went through her divorce, I was talking to her, and she was telling me about it. And I looked right at her, and I said, "So do you want to fix this marriage?" And she's like, "Yeah." And then I looked at her again, and I said, "So do you have a replacement already picked out?" Because I knew the situation more than she realized. And she goes, "Well, not for sure." And I went, "Okay, are you currently talking to somebody who's not your husband, who's a male?" And she went, "Well, yeah." And I looked right at her, and I said, "Basically, let me tell you what, you don't want to fix your marriage. You want to move on." And I see that all the time, especially nowadays with text messaging and things like that, and instant messaging and Facebook and things like that. You can have an ongoing relationship with somebody very easily. And what happens is your emotions leave the situation, and I had a lady that she claimed she wanted to fix her marriage, and here she was talking to this guy for 2 years, and so she didn't want to fix her marriage. She wanted to move on.
Is the grass greener on the other side?
We think it is.
We do.
The unknown is always, what is the demon? How does that go? The demon out there is not, what doesn't matter. No, the grass always seems greener on the other side, but guess what? It's not, because the unknowns will destroy you. Is it easier to fix a marriage rather than go into a new one? Oh, what do you think?
I think logic will tell you, I would imagine the issues and problems that arose in the first marriage to begin with, or that particular marriage, eventually, right, will creep its ugly head in the next.
Yep.
So we're talking about unresolved issues.
Yep.
And so that's what happens, right? So you're talking about baggage, basically, and you're jumping out of one and into the other, thinking that somehow that you're going to be fulfilled. This is another really big topic of conversation that we could get into, the rate of divorce, right? Just in our country alone, let's say over the last 20, 30 years, a little different than 60, 70, 80 years ago, right? Or even 100 years ago, or 1,000 years ago. And I think a lot of it has to do with, I asked you last week if you ever heard of this particular organization. I do think there's a sense of, or a bit of social engineering that takes place. Why would you want to break up the family? Why would you want to cause a high rate of divorce when you just stop and think about it? So if you remember, I asked you about this organization over in Europe called the Tavistock Institute, and I really encourage anybody to take a dive deep into some of the things that they've done over the last 60 years. But yeah, with what we see today, I mean, I think that from on a societal level, that it was all planned out. There's a particular purpose behind it.
Yeah, they want to destroy the family because then they can destroy people. And if
they want you. It's just more reliance on the state.
Right.
That's kind of one of the reasons I think that you state the involvement in church the way that it was when you were growing up as opposed to the way that it is now. Again, they want to take that authority away from the church and plan it and give it to the state or the country, right? The government. And that's pretty much exactly what's happened.
Yeah, the government becomes
You're talking about
church.
programs that replaced the programs that the church used to be able to offer and provide.
Yep.
Same thing.
Yeah, and the church kind of kept families together, and whereas the government doesn't, to pay somebody who's a single mom, money, because the dad's not in the house, just encourages the dad not to be in the house, because if daddy's there, the money doesn't come in. So
That's right.
It creates.
Yeah, but mommy left the house too.
Yeah. It's as much as the government thought they were helping people, they were hurting them, because what would happen is it would drive the family together. Really, if you go back and look, before probably World War II, most women didn't work outside the house.
Yeah, they didn't. Yeah.
And
even into the 50s.
People were like, well, they were trapped.
There was a women's revolution, right, wasn't there? In the 60s or the early 70s?
Really, World War II, because men went off the war and the women had to run the factories, I guess you could say.
Yeah. That's understandable under different circumstances.
And women appreciated that newfound freedom.
It was a world war.
Yeah. But if you don't have the ability, and some people say, well, that's terrible if a woman can't leave, because she's stuck in that marriage because she doesn't have any income. This doesn't discount
the fact that there's a lot of people that had no business getting married to begin with. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's some of this is created by society, but were families happy when the mom stayed home and the dad went to work? Were they happier than they are now?
Well, you have a better foundation for the kids.
Right. And that's the key,
and that's that moral and ethical thing that we've kind of touched up on a little bit too, where that seems to have eroded and disappeared again. Why do you think so many people are leaving the church in droves? It seems like these days. Why is the attendance down? And again, all this plays a part in everything that we're talking about.
Yeah. I'm convinced the reason is because people don't understand dispensationalism, and they realize that
plays a big part in it.
The church is a lie to a lot of people, because it is.
That's what they come away thinking, and it's totally unfortunate, but it's obviously not true.
I had a lady tell me yesterday that God does not care about her because she has problems. And she was dead serious. I mean, she was angry at God. And she goes, I don't care if God sends me to hell. He hasn't done a single thing for me. I'm just sick and tired of this. And I'm like, whoa.
What would you call that? What do you think the biggest sin people have is? The most overly glaring sin that it stands out. Isn't that pride?
It's pride.
Isn't that pride?
It's like, where do you want God to start?
God doesn't love me.
Well, she's trying to say that she is trying her best and she's done everything right, and this other person, which was her ex-husband, is evil. And what it was, she's behind on her child support, and so she lost her driver's license, and the state's trying to clamp down on her, and she said it wasn't her fault that she couldn't pay the child support. She actually had the job, and he is kind of a jerk, but that's not the point, but
it sounds like she doesn't want to take responsibility for.
Well, yeah, she plays the victim card. Trust me, I deal with this kind of stuff all the time.
I do too.
Yeah, and it's never anybody's fault. Everybody's always a victim.
It's everybody else's. Not
but again, if you take two mature Christians, let's say even two grace believers, I think they should be able to work anything out. I'm sorry, I do not see to where selfishness, and granted, I know people can be selfish, and we all tend to sometimes.
Well, there's nothing within a relationship that can't be mended or restored.
Right. But if the person moves on and gets a new boyfriend, it gets a little bit difficult, because then
it's kind of hard to do it at that point.
It's almost like they sabotage their own marriage and go, well, okay, you're still not listening, and then they create things that aren't even true because they don't want to fix
part of the flesh.
Yeah, it happens all the time, and it happens with guys too. It's not just the girls.
Oh, you're exactly right.
It's both ways. We're running a 50% divorce rate even among Christians, or somewhere around there.
Probably so.
But again, society's figured out something really cool.
Attitude.
To keep the divorce rate down, we just won't get married. We'll live together. See, and we don't have to get divorced.
Ooh, that's it. Yeah.
See, so isn't that cool?
Sounds like a great plan. What was the whole purpose and reason behind the institution of marriage to begin with? We were made in the image of God, weren't we?
Well, so some of this actually is the fault of society, because we have this thing called dating. And if you think how dating works is, we go out until we get a crisis, and then we break up. And then we move on to someone else until we hit a crisis, and then we break up. And you're always going to have a crisis. And the question is it worth fighting for? But if you've gone through, 4, 5, 6 relationships, 10 relationships, I don't care how many, and then you finally get married, and you're going to hit a crisis.
Yeah, it's going to happen.
But what have you been doing your whole life? Running away. And so you don't know how to fix crises. We are unable to fix crises. We don't know how to deal with them. And so,
and especially these days, the easiest thing to do is just to be able to leave that and go on to
or
go
just
on
don't
to
get
another
married
one.
and just split up,
Yeah.
And then we wonder why
it's totally
there's
unfortunate.
kids involved. I don't care what you say.
Single-parent homes.
If you have single parent homes, I'm talking minor kids, it will affect the kids.
Of course it will.
It always will affect the kids.
Long-ranging effects.
Yeah.
You take the father out of the house potentially, and it's just it's a tough situation. That doesn't mean that it can't be overcome, and hopefully at some point those particular kids can get to a point in their life where they realize the decisions that were made on behalf of them, right, or in spite of them, obviously isn't their fault, and they can put it in perspective and allow them to be able to still live a fulfilled life and move forward, and not repeat the same thing from one generation to the next that happened to them.
I got a question for you.
That happens a lot.
I don't even know. We haven't talked about this. We talked last week a little bit about, there's going to be a reset of everything. And really, I think the middle class is going to be gone.
Well, yeah, they don't want the middle class. Think about the rise of the middle class in the United States. Why don't they want the middle
class? What are they trying to do?
Well, I mean, the first time in human history, when you look at history itself, and the kind of economy that we had that allowed entrepreneurs to be able to be created, right? And so you're talking about there was a wide range of money that was spread out over a lot of people. The reason they don't want that, I think, so when the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, they want that divide, right? So they only want two social classes, right? The elite and literally everybody else.
Oh, okay. So we have the working people and we have the ruling people.
Exactly.
Class. This is England. Whatever.
Yeah. When you think about it, it really is. That's exactly what's taking place. And again, when we were taking off the gold standard, if you look at the middle class, the size of it, it has shrunk.
Yeah.
A lot.
And your wages have gone down every year since, even though you don't realize it.
Absolutely. And they haven't obviously kept with the rate of inflation. So, and again, I think that I think they think that people are more easily controlled if they don't have much, or if they have to depend on somebody for them to be provided the things that they need.
You remember the quote you had last week, and I don't know who said it, but you said, "You will have nothing, and you will be happy."
Yeah. So Klaus Schwab, he's the guy that created the World Economic. See, people need to understand. So the World Health Organization, the World Trade Organization, the World Economic Forum, all these global, because really all they are think tanks.
Yep.
Right? So that's almost like at the managerial level. People need to understand there's many levels even above that really make the decisions. They eventually trickle down through organizations like these that affect the entire world. But go ahead.
Okay. All right. So
what about Klaus? You owe nothing and be happy.
So they want people to basically just work all day as a slave in a sense.
Basically, yes.
And be
that's the way
content.
they see us.
And in order to be content, you have to not know how good things used to be, or you have to forget how good.
Well, I think eventually, people would forget something like that. But that's the direction that they would like to take us into, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing what people forget after one generation to the next, how things were.
So they started this great reset in terms of the information coming out publicly, I would imagine, like back in 2019, 2020. So we're talking about a 10-year plan here, because, right, they say the Great Reset 2030. So, and I guess, I mean, if you're going to ask the question, what are they resetting? What do you think they're resetting? What do you mean the Great Reset?
Well, they're resetting the monetary system on who has the money,
completely.
Right? Yeah.
And so, and the way that our currency works globally now, you have central banks in almost every single nation that print the currency of that particular country. And what a lot of people don't understand or realize is that when they print that money, they lend it to the Treasury Department of whatever country that the central bank is in. Mm-hmm. And so it automatically has interest attached to it, correct, which is basically debt, right? Now, there is a central bank of the central banks. That's called the Bank of International Settlements. Do you know where that's at? It's in Switzerland. I was talking about the World Economic Forum. That's also in Switzerland. Why is this? And then I don't know if I brought up a company I know you and I have talked about this. This is so important. So there's a company called CERN, CERN. Their logo, take a look at it. It's pretty interesting. They made a giant tube. I don't know how far deep underground, huh? It's the Large Hadron Collider.
Yep, okay, I heard that.
And so what they're looking for is what they call the God particle. So if you can shoot, and again, this tube, it's a massive tube, like 10 square miles. So it encompasses a little bit of France and a little bit of Switzerland. I don't know how big around it is circumference-wise, but it's massive, right? So they shoot these, I guess, protons or electrons, something like that, at the maybe faster than the speed of light.
Okay.
And they collide.
Oh, okay.
And so what they're trying to do is open up portals from other dimensions.
Oh.
Do you know what portal they're trying to open up?
I don't know.
The bottomless pit.
Trying to go to hell.
What's that's precisely all right. So they turned this thing on back in July, I think, for the first time to test again. I can't remember how many years it was, and they had a ceremony. I got to send you this video.
What happens if it works?
Well, they're trying to bring something into our reality. If you're opening up a portal, you're opening up a portal to...
Why wouldn't you want to open up a portal to heaven?
Because it's all satanic.
Yeah.
Who do you think created the company? I mean, again, it's all part of the same people, right? Making the same decisions and ultimately after the same end. And it's all leading toward a one world government being set up where the very few control the many.
Well, I guess during the tribulation, that's kind of what's going on. You know, we do have satanic influence and realm and things like that going on, and we're getting closer and closer.
Daniel's 70th week, right? So the only thing that's prohibiting that from fully taking effect is what?
The body of Christ is still
the
here.
Presence of the Holy Spirit in the body of Christ.
Yep.
Right, so that's all individual believers that are alive and that are asleep, collectively, as a whole, with Christ at the head. That is his body. That is the church.
Well, if you look at history in regards to, you know, this one world order, when the communists took over Russia and people rebelled, what did they do with those people? When the communists took over China and the people rebelled, what did they do with those people?
They killed them.
They killed them. And
what did they do in Nazi Germany?
Of people
They killed them.
Killed in the name of peace, I guess. I don't know what was the name of. And do you think that's possible in America?
Of course it is.
If we don't cooperate.
We've been around for 250 years.
Yep.
I think there's a natural tendency for empires to eventually, if you just look at human history, you go back thousands of years, there is I guess you can say a date of birth of a nation, and there's somewhat of a death of a nation. And if you look at the things that are taking place across our country, and there's so many things that you and I haven't even touched up on. Of course, we'll have a chance to hopefully moving forward to be able to get into some of these. But that's honestly, if you have any discernment from a spiritual standpoint at all as a believer, and you look just within your local community, right, and then you kind of expand out from there, there's only one direction that all of this is going. And I do not see it any other way.
Like downhill?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this isn't, we're not trying to create and produce fear, right, in the hearts and minds of the people that listen to us. What we're trying to do is state reality and give you some truth. But obviously, we know what our hope is.
Yeah.
We know where our citizenship is. Yeah. We know what the end game is. So I always try to think above this, right? Set your affection in your mind and the things on Christ where in heaven above, where he sits at the right hand of the Father. Experientially in our day-to-day life, I think that we can do that.
Well, yeah, the world's going downhill, but it doesn't mean we have to go with it.
That's correct.
You know, we can still have our heavenly hope and our heavenly values and continue to move on. But even like this digital currency and stuff, they're going to look at your Facebook and go, you're one of those rebel Christians. Your money isn't good outside of Evansville because we don't want you causing trouble.
Or no, we're just not going to let you use it for certain things that you want
and so
or need.
You can't buy guns anymore, Nick, because you're just a problem. So
yeah, that would be total control.
Gun store anymore, and you can't use it to buy a car that uses gasoline. You only can use it to buy a car that uses electric. And
that's what they want.
Yeah. And so then they will totally control you because your money will only be good or not good in certain places.
Based on your behavior.
Yep. If you are a good person or a troublemaker.
Sounds backwards.
Yeah. And who decides who's good and who's bad? Not you.
It definitely isn't coming from you.
And so as a conservative Christian who doesn't seem to like the government, I think they're going to find you or me, and they're going to
and I'm not concerned with that.
Thumb on you.
That's right. My concern is more of the truth than it is anything else. Yeah. And all of this stuff has to be exposed and has been exposed. Off camera last week, Pastor, we talked a little bit about I guess, the period of time in my life where I started waking up and seeing things for what they really are.
Yeah.
And realizing that I have been completely lied to my whole life up to that point. And the event that took place was 9/11. I started really digging into that, and it just took me down so many other different paths. And you asked me, where some of this knowledge comes from. I've been ingrained in this for 20 years. Once you're awake, we use that term, and I think it's used so loosely these days. I can't unsee these things.
Yeah.
I can't put the genie back in the bottle.
Yeah, or the toothpaste back in the tube.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think there's a responsibility when you rise above really what's going on here on earth, and you can look at it for what it really is and put it in perspective and understand it. And so I just find it my responsibility to be able to tell other people. For a long time, I kept a lot of this stuff to myself. I really did, and it depends on the person that I was around. And I'd kind of tiptoe about certain things, just simple questions, just to be able to see the level that they were on. And then sometimes I would meet somebody who obviously understood things that I did, and we'd have an open discussion, and we'd talk about all kinds of stuff. That's far and few in between. Mm-hmm. And
most people are, I'm going to call them sheep. Is that a good word? They just
So
they just go along to get along.
You ever heard of the word goyim?
No.
It's a Jewish word for cattle.
Okay.
That's what they think that we are. And again, I'm referring to elite people. They look at us like cattle.
They look at us.
Sheep. Yeah, like cattle. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And a lot of times, even politicians think of the people as being just not too smart. Just
all puppets.
Control them. Yeah.
Every one of them.
It's
So I talked about the Freemasons a little bit. I talked about the Illuminati a little bit. I talked about some of these organizations that exist in our country, because people need to understand the structure. Because I think that a lot of people think, from a power standpoint, the highest you can get is like the president or some kind of a politician, whether it be a senator or a congressman or woman, and it's just not whatsoever. So there's a company not a company, but a think tank or an organization called the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR. Have you heard of them?
I've heard of them.
Okay. There is a secret society at Yale called Skull and Bones. Ever heard of them?
I've heard of them in some movies.
Okay. All right. So what a lot of people think is that that's the Illuminati here in America. Now, we're talking about Skull and Bones being a university secret society that take I think they're juniors is when they tab. Of course, you're picked. You don't choose this.
Okay, yeah. These are the elite of the elite.
Well, of course, right? Yeah. And again, a lot of this is generational. But what I'm saying is I think that they grow up to become adults, and a lot of them become members of the Council on Foreign Relations, right? And so then who's above that? There's what's called a Council of 13.
Okay. Is it 13 people?
It's basically 13 families.
Oh, families, okay.
And this is what I try to explain to people. So you're talking about the concentration of the entire earth in terms of power is concerned is controlled by less than 100 people? Yes, I do.
I even look at...
And then who sits at the very top? Satan.
Okay.
Lucifer.
Yeah. But I even look at the war in Ukraine and go, there's something about this war that doesn't make any sense. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what the answer is. I mean, what I'm told is,
who do you think?
Fighting it over there.
Who do you think? It's a proxy war, right? Who do you think wanted that war?
The elite.
Just think. Okay.
Those who wanted to force the...
But why, though? Why?
Because they need to create a crisis so that you will cooperate.
Okay. Yeah. A little bit more than that. Let's think about the North Atlantic Treaty Organization.
Okay, NATO.
Okay. Let's think about Russia.
Okay.
Ukraine is trying to be, or they were not trying to be.
They wanted to be.
No, we were thinking about letting them in.
They wanted to be
NATO.
neutral. They wanted to be
now,
neutral.
If you think about geography, right? They're in basically Central to Eastern Europe. Mm-hmm. That would mean there would be no buffer zone between Russia and NATO if Ukraine joins NATO. We'd basically be on their doorstep.
Right.
That's one of the motivations for them doing what they've done. Now, Ukraine is a hotbed for money laundering, massively.
Oh, it's so corrupt.
It's almost...
It's terrible.
It's almost the center...
And we're seeing more and more of that even within our government.
Oh, no doubt about it, right?
And so... in our government, yeah.
So people need to stop paying attention to the mainstream media, because you're not going to be told what the truth is. It's almost all propaganda. It's all lies to be able to deceive you to think a certain way. Right?
Okay.
And so what I advise people or encourage people is to seek out alternative sources of media where they can actually get the truth.
Do you think Putin is going to use a nuclear bomb if he gets cornered?
I don't.
Okay.
I don't think I don't think that he needs to use nuclear.
Is this already
nuclear
pre-planned?
bombs? I think
planned in the sense they
just think about this. What's in every war they fought that you can imagine, going back to the Russian Revolution that happened in 1919. Every war since, all they do is throw bodies. At the war, right? Yeah. Think of the number of casualties that they've sustained. So from a conventional standpoint, they don't need to use nuclear bombs. Now, the West and NATO would like, and again, who's behind these organizations in terms of the ones that are making decisions, I don't think that they would totally, because they want to reduce the population, and how do you do that? Mm-hmm. But you got to think, though, when you drop a nuclear bomb, you're leaving something completely desolate. I honestly don't think they don't have to do that to do what they want to do. I don't think that they need to do that.
Well, if you want to get rid of the population, it's one thing. If you drop a nuclear bomb, we're talking about not being able to grow crops for generations, and it kind of cuts into your long-term plans.
It does. And so, again, that's why, from their perspective, I don't think it would be advantageous or wise for them to want to do that, because I mean, if that happens, we're shooting them, they're shooting them. I mean, when's it stop?
Yeah, but see, if where I'm going with this, if Russia and China, which basically this is an East-West thing, if Russia and China and a couple other countries come up with this
Pastor, I think it appears to be. I think it's an illusion, though, because we always need an enemy. If you haven't noticed that,
that's true.
And so it appears that Russia and China are somewhat the enemy. Mm-hmm. And you talking about two big forces opposing one another. Mm-hmm. And I think that what you would do in a situation like that is you create a lot of the fear and hysteria and things of that nature. And I think that it's just another form or another way to be able to control behavior. Yeah.
But the amount of money that we've pumped into that country.
I think behind closed doors, you'd be amazed to see that a lot of these politicians in high places, in terms of power is concerned, they're all friends.
Oh, yeah.
They're all part of it. You know what I'm saying? and then you got to figure out, well, which members of these, elected officials in government that are high up are members of secret societies. It's not even about nationalism. It doesn't have anything to do with it. This is a global situation. They could care less of nation states. They don't want them anymore.
Yeah, they want one government.
One government. Right?
Yeah.
That means you're removing nations.
Yeah.
You're removing
the United
borders.
States needs to be knocked down a peg because
absolutely they do.
They're too powerful, and
that's correct. So how do you take and drop the United States down a few pegs or a few notches?
Well,
there's a few ways, right? I mean, you can destroy it from within. Well, they've done a brilliant job of doing that, haven't they?
Well, they've
when you think about
destroyed our monetary system, our money's useless.
Again, that's another thing that's all by plan and all by design.
Yeah.
And if you really look at what's going on in a country like China, I mean, it is total control. It's an absolute dictatorship, and they have social credit scores. They have digital currency, I think, right? Yep. They're the model for the rest of the world.
It's not fully implemented yet, but they have it.
So how could they be our enemy?
Well, they say that every country is going to have the digital currency that they claim is their own, but it's all the same software. So is it different?
Yeah, and so again, the central bank of the central banks, it's all going to be ran by the Bank of International Settlements. Yep. There's the International Monetary Fund. There's a few of these international banks that act like that. But yeah, where do you think central banks go get their money? The central bank of the central bank. Right, it all funnels down from the very top, and it's spread out through the course of. And who created that? The idea of a central bank. You remember the Rothschilds, don't you?
Yeah, I heard the name. Yeah.
Yeah. So Mayer Amschel Rothschild, he was in Germany. Right. This is a German Jew, an Ashkenazi Jew. Do you know much about them?
No, I never heard of them. The plot thickened.
It does, but yeah. So they were the ones that funded and helped create the Illuminati.
So I mean, we're into this. All right. So there's a game within the game within the game within the game.
Absolutely.
I'm not really looking to infiltrate any of these groups. We got to learn to exist.
Well, they've infiltrated the highest places of every industry.
We're not going to win, but we don't have to play either, in the sense that we can do our own thing, kind of underground or.
Well, hold on a second, Pastor. When you say we're not going to win,
these guys are going to win because we know in the end the tribulation's going to happen and one world government's coming and we're out of here. We're going to heaven.
Yes, but that's the ultimate win.
Yeah.